Let's talk now about the migration figures. Joining me now, Danny Shaw, who's the Home Affairs commentator and ex-advisor to Yvette Cooper. Good morning to you.
Good morning, David. Hi.
Yeah, really good to talk to you. Now, look, there's a really interesting article here about what happened in 2004, the accession of those Eastern European countries of the Czech Republic, Estonia, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Slovakia and Slovenia. And when that happened, Blair was urged by those people closest to him saying, hang on, let's not have an open door policy. Let's have a transition period, which many other countries did, to ensure that we weren't overwhelmed by the number of people. But it was people like Blunkett who pushed Blair, and they woefully underestimated the numbers that would come to the United Kingdom.
Yes, I mean, I remember this argument at the time, David. I was covering it as a Home Affairs correspondent, and there was a Home Office internal paper going around that has suggested that the numbers coming would be around 13,000, something like that. I mean, a very small number. And the Home Office, and Blunkett, I think, was a Home Secretary at the time, clearly believed that this wasn't going to be a big problem. The economy really needed an influx of people coming in. And he was supported by Andrew Smith, who was another cabinet minister as well. And they managed to persuade Tony Blair, Prime Minister at the time, that there didn't need to be any transitional controls. So that people from Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Estonia and so on could come, work in the UK, and there wouldn't be any problem whatsoever. And of course, they were completely wrong. But what's interesting is that from these papers that have just been released, is that there were other senior members of the cabinet who were warning Blair that this was going to be a problem. Jack Straw, who was Foreign Secretary at the time, later said that it was a spectacular mistake. And I think John Prescott as well was advising Blair to put some kind of controls on people, either visa system, permit system, something like that, as most other European countries did. But Blair let people come in, and the result was that we had sort of net EU migration of around 200,000 a year. Now, what we wouldn't give for those figures now.
Well, quite. I mean,
net migration of around 700 to 900.
But the margin of error there, from 13,000 up to 200,000, it shows just how woefully inadequate those projections were. And actually, that was a catastrophic mistake, and it was a failure of governance.
I think in terms of immigration and sustainability, in terms of social housing and all the infrastructure that needed to be put in place, yes, it was a mistake. In terms of the economy, it's probably harder to judge because, a lot of the people came and did work that wasn't, that there was no supply of labour for here.
Well, I'm not sure that's true. They certainly undercut traditional British workers.
There was a certain argument about undercutting. I remember some other papers at the time saying that there was a net benefit to the economy. So, to be honest, I'm not, completely clear about what the evidence, the total evidence was about the benefit economically.
I mean, I think what we saw was loads of people coming here working very hard, and I can't take that away from them. But Peter Blexley is right. You saw 6, 7 people in a room, single men, particularly single men, then sending the money overseas to their family, and I don't blame them for doing that. So essentially, you had cheap labour, you had money leaving the country, and no trace of that money at all. Meanwhile, we lost our skills, we lost our trades. You got Tony Blair then saying, well, actually, don't be a carpenter, go to university. That was a terribly misguided policy.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, this big push to get people into higher education, into universities, without any really equivalent scheme to drive up apprenticeships and trades and so on, and just, get people coming in from overseas to do these jobs. I think we can look back and say that was a mistake. There should have been some controls put in, and he should have listened to the advice of some of his senior colleagues, and he didn't. When other European countries were putting those controls in at the time. But I remember those arguments raging very, very clearly, in 2004. And suddenly we had this influx of Poles and, other people coming in. And also that, the composition of towns and cities changed extraordinarily as well. And communities weren't prepared for it and the infrastructure wasn't in place.
100%. When I look at the numbers since 2010, net migration has added 3.7 million people to the population. That's higher than the population of Wales. It's 8 times the size of Liverpool. And you're right, there wasn't the infrastructure, the doctors, the hospitals, the education, the schools, the houses. There is also, just in terms of that, net migration means that you need about 120,000 new homes every year. We simply aren't building it. We are not capable of actually accommodating the numbers that are coming in.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's why, the government is saying it's committed to reducing net migration. I think it's wise not to put a target on it because I think, firstly, people don't believe the targets because the Conservatives failed to hit the targets. And secondly, the immigration numbers are made up of different categories of people. They're made up of people who are coming here to flee persecution, Ukrainians, people from Hong Kong, and so on, for example, and Afghanistan. And if there's a sudden, war on the continent, we have to admit people to flee the war, then the numbers are going to go up. And the other thing is students, foreign students. We know that that's a driver for the economy and particularly for universities. So if that's why I don't think it's helpful to look at just one ball target, but to look at each sector bit by bit and say, well, what can we do to ensure we don't have to get an influx of engineers from abroad? Well, we have to get our engineering companies to offer apprenticeships and training schemes so that we can employ British-based people. That's what I think you have to do. You have to take a sector-by-sector approach. But clearly the numbers are unsustainable and are too high. And the previous government, I'm afraid, was responsible for that.
Let's also talk, the thing that will inflame people this morning is they are seeing just uncontrolled immigration into this country, but also spiralling crime. We talked about Sadiq Khan presiding over enormous increase in knife crime in London and being rewarded. But also there's this story that says the Home Office tried to halt the private prosecution of a foreign shoplifter. Essentially, he had been involved in 7 shoplifting offences. The police failed to arrest him on multiple occasions. So a private security firm called My Local Bobby actually then made an arrest. They mounted a private prosecution of him. He's a Romanian migrant. Police failed to turn up to this store after 7 shoplifting raids. They then mounted a private prosecution. The Home Office then lent on the prosecutors to say, please drop this case because we are trying to deport him. What's going on here?
I've got to say, this is one of the most puzzling stories. The most stories that you come across, you can sort of explain it or perhaps see the logic behind it. Just cannot understand with this one. This guy, Ian Etchenku, 43 years old, illegal Romanian, 7 times caught shoplifting, thousands of pounds worth of goods. The police are called. Apparently, they never turn up. You might understand them not coming perhaps the first time, but the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh time, they don't come. He's then finally detained by this private security group who mount their private prosecution. The Home Office saying, drop it because we're trying to take action against him to deport him. I don't understand, really, because they know that if he's going to be prosecuted again for this, they can deport him at the end of that sentence. Or surely would have said, OK, well, let's speed up the deportation proceedings that we've got. The whole thing seems to me to be a completely dysfunctional system. You've got the police not responding to sort of so-called lower level crime, although shoplifting can be serious crime because of the value of the goods stolen and the impact on retailers. And then you've got the immigration system not working properly. I mean, will he really be deported at the end of his prison term? He's got a 22-week sentence. I mean, he'll be out within just 11. A few weeks of that. Are they going to be waiting at the prison gates and detaining him and then putting him on a plane back to Romania? Really? I'd be really surprised if that happens, just because of the way this
and
is
I think that's what people are seeing this morning. The injustice of all of this is that you can be a repeated offender, you finally actually get sentenced, and then you are let free to roam again, to steal. There seems to be absolutely no justice being served in this country. And the gaps also between all those agencies not working together.
Yeah, I mean, that's the really disturbing thing here, is that if the agencies actually got their act together and did work together, then this guy could have been arrested and probably deported straight away. You know, I think it'd be really interesting now to track that case and to see what happens at the end of his prison sentence and whether he is actually removed. I mean, you know, we need immigration for some, you know, labour shortages that we can't fill. And we offer sanctuary to people who are really fleeing persecution. But what we don't need is prolific criminals in our country. And this guy fits that category. And it's a clear-cut case. He shouldn't be here. He should be back in his home country.
Well said.